Good evening and welcome to the review. Our topic of discussion today is natural disaster insurance. I have with me a policy note that was compiled by the economics research team at Verite Research recently, which speaks of solving the lethargy on language policy, which will go on to help small and medium enterprises island-wide in terms, of course, of natural disaster insurance. Now, there are four key findings that have been made in this policy note. One is that Sri Lanka fares poorly in natural disaster insurance coverage and SMEs are the worst off. Private insurance providers exploit the language barrier. That's two. Number three, information on state insurance welfare schemes are not informed in the vernacular. And four, banking sector language regulations are not yet replicated in the insurance sector. Our guest this evening is one of the co-authors of this policy note, Sachintha Fernando from Verite Research. Sachintha, thank you very much for taking time off to come and talk to us about this very important issue. Let me start off by asking you on the first of your findings. Sri Lanka fares poorly in natural disaster insurance coverage. SMEs are the worst off. Now, this is a very interesting fact, given that over the past several years we've seen clockwork natural disasters striking like clockwork, and as you quite correctly mentioned in your policy note, SMEs being or what policymakers like to call the engine of growth, being the worst off, really has an impact on the economy as well. What were the key findings in terms of natural disaster insurance penetration in the SME sector?
Thank you. Well, like you said, SMEs are a very important component of the Sri Lankan economy. They contribute significantly, especially because about 80% of all the businesses in the country comprise of SMEs. They, I think, contribute approximately about 52% to GDP. 45% of employment is generated by SMEs. So you can see that they are a very important economic section in the economy. And especially in terms of natural disasters, they're a very vulnerable section because of the lack of financial resources and the lack of business continuity plans and resilience and so on. However, with respect to natural disasters, there are a section in the economy that does not get as much attention. When you talk about natural disasters, you talk about the number of houses and the persons affected and so on. But SMEs are a very important part of the economy who probably face a lot of negative repercussions due to natural disasters, especially, as you said, that natural disasters have been occurring in the country almost like clockwork in the past 3 years. So it is very important to find out how they can face natural disasters and how they can recover from such situations to get back to their current status. So that is an important.
One of the in your findings, Sri Lanka fares poorly in natural disaster insurance coverage. SMEs are the worst off. You mentioned the fact that non-life insurance penetration rate for Asia is 1.74% of GDP. Is that an anomaly when comparing to the rest of the world?
I don't think it's an anomaly. When you look at the penetration rates in the other parts of the world, in the developing world, it's around 2. But in comparison to Sri Lanka, which I think was 0.66%, you can see that it is quite low, the insurance penetration. And also, when you compare the insurance penetration to other countries like Thailand, India, other comparable countries in the Asian region, our insurance penetration is also significantly lower than those countries.
What are the reasons that you identified for this low sort of insurance, non-life insurance penetration?
So non-life, Sri Lanka doesn't have a very strong insurance culture to begin with, and there are a number of reasons that could have resulted in this low insurance penetration. But if you look at our policy note, what we have identified is actually with respect to natural disaster insurance, which is actually a subcomponent of general insurance. We have identified that there is a language barrier that actually prevents access to insurance. Now, you might not initially look at this as a very important finding, but if you are unable to access information regarding your insurance policy, this could actually act as a significant barrier into accessing natural disaster insurance.
That brings me to my next question. Private insurance providers exploit the language barrier. That was finding number 2. When reading this policy note, this section of the policy note at least reads almost as sort of a damning indictment of the insurance industry in Sri Lanka. You mentioned the fact that the top 6 general insurance providers in Sri Lanka account for 2/3 of the market share, and only one provider issued fire insurance policy documents in Sinhala. None of the insurance providers issued these documents in Tamil. This sounds like a huge problem.
Yes, it is. It is quite a big problem, especially when you look at the literacy rate, the basic English literacy rate of the country, which is around 30%. So you can imagine that the literacy rate outside of Colombo is probably lower. So when insurance companies actually don't provide their insurance documents, their terms and conditions in a language that the consumer can actually understand, this can lead to a problem. And we found out that information about the 6 big companies. We basically did phone calls and asked from them if they had insurance policies, fire insurance policies readily available in Sinhala and Tamil. And further, this through our interviews with SMEs in the Sabaragamuwa district who were highly affected by the 2017 floods, we got to we realized that a lot of the SMEs who had actually taken the initiative and purchased natural disaster insurance, who were told at the time of purchase that flood insurance was included in their cover, when they went to actually claim it, found out that flood insurance was not included in their natural disaster insurance policy. So
that sounds quite duplicitous, misleading.
It is, and we don't know at which point this happens, but very often when the agent is selling the insurance policies to consumers, and very often when agents, that the salaries or their remuneration is driven by their commissions, the fact that there is no regulation that mandates that terms and conditions have to be provided in English can lead to the opportunity for exploitation. So when we spoke to these SMEs, all of them actually had obtained...
Sacintha, just excuse me for a second, we'll come back to the subject of exploitation. Okay. We just have to go in for a quick short commercial break. As soon as we come back, natural disaster insurance in Sri Lanka and the SME sector. Welcome back to the review. We're in conversation with Sacintha Fernando of Verite Research, co-author of the policy note, Natural Disaster Insurance Coverage, Solving the Lethargy on Language Policy Will Help SMEs Island-Wide. Sacintha, when we left off, we were talking about one of the key findings that in the policy note, which was private insurance providers exploit the language barrier. You mentioned how you spoke to several SMEs in disaster-stricken districts, where they said that at the point of purchasing the insurance policy, they were told that flood damage was also covered, but when they tried to claim it, they discovered that it in fact was not. This was a problem that you pinpointed, or the reason for this problem you pinpointed as the language barrier. What was the sense that you got from the SME business owners regarding their plight?
As I said before, they were of course very disappointed, because in their minds they had taken these precautionary steps that actually they weren't able to get any compensation even though they had taken these precautionary steps. And one thing that they actually mentioned was all the insurance documents and the terms and conditions were given to them in English. So these are the contractual documents that they sign. And if you take something like terms and conditions of insurance, there it's a highly technical language, and even for a person who is a native speaker, it's sometimes difficult to fully comprehend. So when you take SMEs, especially SMEs outside of Colombo, where literacy rates in English are very low, this could lead to problems, and they are not able to access or benefit from obtaining these insurance schemes.
So there is a clear lack of regulation of the insurance industry in the country.
Regulation in terms of customer or language policy, we actually investigated this further, and we found out that there was no regulation or directive mandating that information to customers should be provided in their preferred language. So that is actually a gap that we discovered, which I think is fairly simple to address, which can easily be addressed, but has not been addressed as yet. And
one of the largest insurance providers in the country, one of, if not the largest insurance provider in the country, is actually a state-owned corporation. Were you surprised that even a state-owned enterprise, state entity, did not have these insurance policy documents or these contracts in the language that their clients were most comfortable with?
Yes, to be honest, I was actually surprised that these documents were not given in the customer's preferred language. And it's not something you think about, but because of this research and through our investigation, it's something that actually came from the businesses themselves. And then when we actually went back and did our research, we found out that this was the case. And whether through our calls to the insurance companies, we found out that they were not readily available. So, and especially because there is no regulation mandating this, they can, even if they have it, they don't necessarily have to provide it to the customer. So that was quite surprising.
In this kind of a situation, what role does the Insurance Board of Sri Lanka play?
I think the Insurance Board of Sri Lanka, especially because they are the regulatory body and they have the authority to safeguard the interests of their customers, and they can provide directives. It is something that can easily be rectified through a regulation or a directive that they issue to the insurance companies, where they specify that customer language needs to be prioritized, and that the information that the customer receives should be in a preferred language.
As part of your research, you submitted an RTI request to the Insurance Board of Sri Lanka, and you love the one-page responses that you get to RTI requests at times, where they say no guidelines or any related documents have been issued by the IBSL on drafting insurance proposals. Guidelines on linked long-term businesses dated, etc., etc. No rules or any related documents have been issued by IBSL on specifying language to be used in drafting insurance-related documents. No rules or any related documents have been issued by IBSL on setting limits for insurance proposals. Does this, to you, display a kind of a laissez-faire attitude towards regulation?
Like I said before, I think the fact that the IBS actually responded to the RTI and responded to what we actually requested from them is a very good thing, and the comments we've actually had from them have been positive. So perhaps going forward that they are cooperating with us, maybe it's something that can be rectified in the future.
You mentioned that this problem of the language barrier is something that can be solved simply through a directive from the IBSL. It doesn't require an act of parliament, for example. So why then the lethargy on language policy?
So this is the finding that was revealed through our research and through our conversations with IBSL. There could be a number of reasons that are preventing them from issuing such a regulation. If you look at the banking industry, for instance, which is another industry that works in the same financial sector, have actually adopted a directive where they have issued a customer charter which specifies that all banking products and services need to be provided in the customer's preferred language. So it's something similar that the insurance board can do, but why they have not done it so far is perhaps maybe it just hasn't emerged as an issue before.
But with numerous people who have taken natural disaster insurance, going before and raising this issue, it's surprising that this has not cropped up in the past, that this is coming to light only now through this policy note.
Yeah, it is definitely surprising, but I don't know why. It's only, I don't know if it has been discussed in the past, but through our research, it is one of the significant findings that we actually...
Thank you, Sachinta. We're going for another short commercial break. When we come back, we'll be talking about information on state insurance welfare schemes not being informed in the vernacular. Welcome back to the review. We're in conversation with Sachinta Fernando of Verite Research, the co-author of the policy note on natural disaster insurance coverage in Sri Lanka and SMEs. Now, among the key findings in this policy note is the fact that information on state insurance welfare schemes are not informed in the vernacular. This is fairly surprising. As you mentioned earlier, when we were talking about private sector insurance providers, we mentioned the fact that one of the largest insurance providers is in fact a state-owned corporation. But here we're finding out again that even the National Insurance Trust Fund, the natural disaster insurance, the National Natural Disaster Insurance Policy, which is administered by the National Insurance Trust Fund, is also not, information regarding that is also not informed in the vernacular. Did you identify any reasons for this? Any justification for why it's not informed in the vernacular?
Well, like you said, the National Natural Disaster Insurance Scheme, which was actually implemented in 2016 by the NITF, partly to address the fact that SMEs find it hard to obtain natural disaster insurance. We actually subsequently found out that on their website, the insurance section on this particular scheme was not updated in Sinhala or Tamil. I don't know whether it is why this is the reason. It could be neglect or maybe for many reasons. But however, subsequently, the beginning of this year, it was updated in Sinhala. But that is about 2 years after 2 natural disasters have occurred that this information is updated in Sinhala. To my knowledge, it's still not updated in Tamil. And in general, if you look at this scheme, there is a lot of lack of awareness about the existence of this scheme, where businesses or SMEs who have, I think, earn a revenue less than 10 million for the year can obtain compensation provided if in an event of a natural disaster. So this was also identified in the post-disaster needs assessment, in one of the post-disaster needs assessment, that even though this insurance scheme is available, there is a lack of awareness about it. So that is a bit of an issue, because you have this scheme which is available to SMEs and they are not aware of it. So that is something we found out.
You also mentioned that surveys of SMEs in the Mathura and Galle districts, 2 of the districts that were among the worst affected by the May 2017 floods, revealed a lack of awareness about even the existence of the NNDIP, the National Natural Disaster Insurance Policy. Now, it's very interesting, this lack of awareness, because I remember around the same time last year, an expose on Action TV, our investigative journalism segment at Newsfirst, revealed that the National Insurance Trust Fund had forgotten to pay the premium on its reinsurance policy. Do these sort of incidents, forgetting to pay your premiums on the reinsurance policy, the lethargy when it comes to implementing a language policy, which should be second nature for a state institution, does this sort of represent a malaise in administration in the National Insurance Trust Fund?
Well, one of the reasons that it's not the lack of awareness, and like you said, this issue with the reinsurance, I think it is a fairly new scheme. It was only implemented in 2016, and I think from my conversations with them, they did not foresee natural disasters happening every year. So one of the reasons that they gave was they had so much of work to do and claims to file and so on. So that could be a reason for the delay in all of this. But I think in general, that is something that's quite common in most government institutions. They're not as proactive as they should be in providing information or so on. So I don't think it's unique to the NITF.
Let's talk about the banking sector. You mentioned earlier that banking sector language regulations are quite robust, but this has not yet been replicated in the insurance sector. Why this sort of delay?
Like I said before again, it could be that this issue has just not been brought to their notice previously. I didn't come across any research that actually had pinpointed the language policy as a problem in accessing insurance, natural disaster insurance or insurance in that matter within Sri Lanka. There are a lot of, in the insurance industry, the low penetration, there could be a lot of reasons. But through our investigations, we actually pinpointed this to be something that can be actioned. So it could be just, it hasn't been brought up before.
Natural disasters have a bad habit of hitting the most vulnerable communities. And we've seen this happen time and time again in Sri Lanka as well. How important is it that these issues surrounding natural disaster insurance and also regulation of the insurance industry as a whole, especially to prevent exploitative practices by insurance companies and insurance agents, how important is it that this is resolved swiftly, and what can be done to resolve it swiftly?
I think there are two things. You have to act like insurance is something that you get to compensate for your financial losses, and it needs to be done in a timely manner, because there is no point getting your compensation 6 to 8 months afterwards, because by that time you have already faced more losses. So I think the insurance industry needs to be more proactive and efficient in administering their claims and so on. Also, there is a lot of something that should be looked at is actually preventive measures by SMEs, by businesses, that you can actually do to, for example, just raising your building or things like that, that you should proactively do to protect yourself from natural disasters.
One final question I have for you now. You mentioned in the policy note that when it comes to disaster insurance, it's usually an extension of fire insurance. Do you think it's strange that in a country where the majority of natural disasters are related to floods and landslides, that those two forms of natural disasters will not be what is clearly mentioned in the policy? Does it indicate a subversive or ulterior motive, given that you also previously talked about exploitation? That you say it's fire insurance, and then the insurance agent tells the prospective policyholder that it also includes floods, but then they find out, hey, it doesn't include floods. Do you think that maybe that there should be stricter, more stringent regulations when it comes to actually drafting these insurance proposals?
I think so. With natural disaster insurance being categorized under fire insurance, that could be something to do with insurance terminology. But with respect to actually having more stringent regulations or requirements in drafting these proposals, I definitely think that apart from the policy, there should be perhaps like a cover letter or something that actually explains it in more of an understandable language. And also, again, the language policy comes up because even if you purchase a fire insurance, you should be able to read the terms and conditions and what is covered underneath it. So when you are not able to do that, this leads to the possibility of being exploited.
Sachanta, thank you once again for taking the time off to come here and to talk about the very important work that you've done here. As you said, it's a very simple fix, really, at least when it comes to the problem of the language policy. It just takes a directive from the Insurance Board of Sri Lanka. Sachanta, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For coming on the show once again. So will the Insurance Board of Sri Lanka act swiftly to ensure that no one else is victimized? That's our show for this evening. I'll see you again, same time, same place. Good night and good luck.